Hi, welcome to Wine Styles Inc. 10-Minute Tasting. I'm Mindy, and I'm one of the owners here at Wine Styles, and we're located in the district in Prairie Trail, and we're here for all of your wine needs, both in-house and retail. And today I'm here with Cheyenne, our events and marketing coordinator, and Paul, my co-owner, and our certified specialist of wine here at the store. Cheyenne, tell us what we're going to chat about today.
So we are talking about all things sparkling wine.
Love
I absolutely
sparklings.
love sparkling. So to get one thing straight, we are not drinking champagne. Champagne is just a region in France. Not all sparklings are going to be champagne. However, there is the traditional method of creating sparkling wines, which is also known as the méthode champenoise. Am I saying that correctly?
That's perfect.
Yes.
From my high school my high school French. I think you hit that right on the head.
And just to mention, because you said not all sparklings, are champagne.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes on sparkling wines that are not from the Champagne region, you will see that method traditional or method champenoise.
Champenoise,
Champenoise. But that does not mean it's from Champagne. So learning how to read the labels is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, yeah, it's interesting when you look at the nomenclature. So technically the only sparkling wine that can be called champagne is from the Champagne region of France. And champagne, the name, is not a generic term. So if anybody uses that term, the people from Champagne will find out about it. They usually will have you stop. Now there are some sparkling wines from California that say California Champagne, but I believe they have to pay a licensing fee to Champagne to use the term champagne. So.
Interesting.
So besides the traditional method, what other methods are there to make champagne?
Another one that I found that is kind of one of the more popular ones has been the tank method. So with that one, a second fermentation is done in the tank, whereas with the traditional method, that is all done within the bottle.
Yeah, the traditional method, or champenoise method, was arguably a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
They made wine and it didn't ferment all the way, and it was put in a cellar, and it was cold in France in the cellar. And in the spring, when it warmed up, a new fermentation started because some of the yeast cells were still alive, and there was still sugar left in the bottle, and the bottles exploded. And they thought it was a fault. They thought the wine was ruined because of the bubbles in the wine, and obviously the bottles exploding. But then they tasted it, and they realized that
we have
that is pretty spectacular.
Creation.
That is pretty spectacular. So
Yes.
the one thing, when you do the bottle method, the bottles have to be heavier, and so when you look at champagne bottles, they're always very thick glass and very heavy, and they have the wire on the cork to hold it in because there's 6 atmospheres of pressure in here holding the CO2. And so the traditional method is to make a base wine. So they make a wine normally, usually in a vat. They put it in a bottle. They put a little extra sugar and a little yeast in the bottle, and then seal it up, and then that bottle sits and a new fermentation starts. And fermentation, as we know, produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so if it's in the bottle, then the carbon dioxide gets trapped, and that's where you get the bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
And the tank method that Cheyenne mentioned is the same thing. It's just a big pressure cooker. It's just a big pressurized tank. Normal winemaking, the CO2 will just go off into the atmosphere, and they trap it in the tank and give it CO2. There's also a kind of a cheating method where you can just bubble in some CO2 into the wine. Good for Diet Coke and other soda pop, but not thought to be the premium method to make sparkling wine.
Mm-hmm. And even I catch myself, I don't know if you guys caught it, but I said, hey, tell me how to make champagne with the tank method, which clearly they're not using the tank method in champagne.
Well, some places will, but by and large, the premium producers are doing the traditional method.
Yeah, the term champagne is just so, it's almost like we think of it like Kleenex. You know, you call everything Kleenex
Yes.
when it's clearly not. And it's fun when you start to learn the differences. So we actually have a cava in our glass. So cava is Spain's sparkling wine, or Spain's champagne, so to speak. And it's typically a blend of several different grapes.
Yes, and they're very hard to pronounce and even harder to spell, but I'll take a shot. The first one's easy. Chardonnay is usually a component, but there's a grape called Macabeo, one called Pareda, and Zarello. So I can't spell them, I can barely say them, but those are the traditional cava grapes, and they give a character that's very similar to a French champagne, which, by the way, which grape is French champagne? Always.
Chardonnay.
Almost always. It can be Chardonnay or Pinot
Pinot
Noir,
Noir,
if
yes.
it's a
Yep.
rosé.
Yep.
I caught myself, but if it's white, typically it's going to be Chardonnay, and if it's a rosé, then usually Pinot Noir.
And if you notice, we're drinking our sparkling wine or cava out of regular glasses. So I know the flutes, we have them, we use them. They're beautiful, they're fun, they're festive. You can see the little bubbles going up and down, great for special occasions. Sparkling wine is not just for special occasions. And it's also much more enjoyable when you actually drink it out of a regular glass. And the reason is because you can actually get your nose into the glass and smell it. And I know, Paul, you talk a lot about the tasting senses, and smell is a huge part of that.
Actually, probably 80 to 90% of our taste comes from our nose, from our smell. And you can test that, when you used to have to take the terrible medicine when you were a kid. What did you do? You plugged your nose, and then you can't taste it as much because the olfactory or nasal sensation is a big part of tasting. And when I taste this, and when you taste many sparkling wines that are made in the traditional method, they're aged on the lees, which are the dead yeast cells. It has a distinct bread character or toast.
Yes.
And I don't mean toast like oaky, but bread. I mean, and it's very, very enjoyable, and that's wines that are aged on the lees or the solids have that character. It's really, really delightful in this one, I think.
So Cheyenne, I mentioned, that sparkling wine is not just for celebrations and parties. It goes great with food as
Yes.
well. So being the foodie in the group, what do you think you would enjoy this cava with?
Literally everything. So I love doing research, so I was looking up kind of what would you pair sparkling wines with, and so it's perfect for an aperitif, it's perfect for appetizers, for entrees, and even with dessert. This would be perfect with it almost makes me hungry for like a nice cut of steak, because the acid is just so prevalent, and the bubbles kind of make me want something that is rich and hearty, but it also kind of makes me hungry for a nice little lemon cake.
Oh, absolutely.
Something simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to review the different regions, so we talked about in the United States, it's going to be sparkling wine, most likely. In Spain, cava. And Cheyenne mentioned Italy. In Italy, it's going to be Prosecco. And so Prosecco is the Italian sparkling wine, made usually from the Glera grape, which is absolutely delicious. We actually have a really nice Prosecco most of the time on our wine tap system that's just delicious. And there's also sparkling wines from other areas of France. So Champagne is so proud of their product and their name that even if you're in France, out of the Champagne region, you can't call it Champagne. And so there's 7 other areas, predominant areas, that make sparkling wines, and they're called Cremant. So you'll have Cremant de Bourgogne,
Right here, one of my
which
favorites.
we have,
Yeah.
which is absolutely delicious. All of the Cremants, by the way, are going to be made in the traditional method as well. But there's 7 other regions in France that do sparkling wines, and unfortunately can't use the term champagne on their bottles. But don't be put off by that. Cremant, sparkling wine from the United States. I know there's many California producers that do the traditional techniques, and they're just absolutely phenomenal.
And it's nice too because you can get a great sparkling for a little bit lower price point without that champagne name to it. Cheyenne has one of her favorites here on the table, which is, tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Gusburn is honestly my favorite sparkling. A little bit of history about England and champagne. Winston Churchill loved champagne. World War II, I am still convinced that he got into the war mostly because he wanted to save champagne. That's not factual at all, but so England has a thriving wine scene, both in Birmingham and in the Cliffs of Dover, which is where Gusburn is located. They have a very similar terroir to Champagne. The only main difference is the fact that it does have a lot more of a sea influence to it, as well as a lot more fog. But the Gusburn is phenomenal. It's made in the traditional method, and honestly, one of my favorite bubbles that we carry.
It is a really good one. Their rosé is phenomenal. Too.
Most of the premier sparkling producers are going to be in a cooler climate. Champagne is a relatively cool climate, and that's because you want that bright acid character to come through. And it's a huge part of both the food friendliness of bubblies as well as just the enjoyment of a glass.
Well, hopefully you'll come in the store and ask us some more about our sparkling, because we have a great selection and we can point out a few of our favorites for you, and you can learn more about Cava, more about Cremant, more about Champagne too, because we do have some great true champagnes that are an awesome value, and also start to incorporate them into your everyday life. So not just having them for those celebrations, but pairing them with a great steak. That was not blasphemy. I will fully support Cheyenne in that.
No, absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
she's absolutely right. The bubbles and the acid can cut through that fat of that steak. Great with seafood. We can point you in the direction of ones that are slightly on the sweeter side for your dessert pairings as well. So excellent option for everyday drinking.
Yes.
Not just for New Year's.
That's right. That's right. Well, salute.
Cheers.